Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. We're about to start the 1:10 to 2 o'clock panel, and it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Alex Philp of GCS. He will be the moderator of this panel, which is a roundtable on the economic importance of wilderness. Alex served as a backcountry ranger in Glacier National Park from 1986 to 1990. Following that, he went to Seattle University and graduated in 1990 with an undergrad in history and philosophy. Following his graduation from Seattle University, Alex worked in the Bob Marshall Wilderness as a biotechnician from 1990 to 1991. He then came to Montana, where he got his master's in interdisciplinary studies in history, geography, and ecology in 1997. Following that, he received his doctorate, also in interdisciplinary studies, in 2005 in historical biogeography and geospatial systems. Alex then used his love of wilderness and technology to start GCS, which stands for Geographic Communication Systems, which he's been running for the last 12 years. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alex Philp.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. On behalf of my company, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to be on this panel and moderating this panel discussion today. And I want to thank our guests for being here very, very much. And also thank all of you in the audience for being here as well. This isn't really a round table, but it is designed to be a discussion, and it is designed to really probe the essential questions that we as business leaders across Montana in different walks of life and different business models, what our impressions and thoughts are of wilderness, and obviously the Wilderness Act, and what the linkage is between our economy and this most precious thing that we call wilderness. I want to thank, obviously, the Mansfield Center for putting this conference on. I think it's fantastic. The addition of Dr. Abraham Kim to the Mansfield Center at the University of Montana is really furthering the legacy of Senator Mansfield in a great way. Second of all, this panel is sponsored by an organization that I care very deeply about, a Business for Montana Outdoors, or BFMO, Business for Montana Outdoors. I am a founding member of that organization on behalf of one of my companies, GCS, and some of these panelists are also aware and involved in Business for Montana Outdoors. And we're going to hear a little bit about that. But this panel, tonight's activities are really are sponsored by BFMO. There's literature and materials about the organization outside on the deck, on the desk, and I would really encourage folks to look at that. And we're going to probe some of those questions this afternoon with the panelists. Now, with all that being said, the way this is going to work is I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists and have them tell you a little bit more about themselves and what their interests are and what their businesses are. They all have very unique businesses and models, and they're doing remarkable things and have done remarkable things for a lot of years. Then I've really got three questions that I'm going to ask the panelists to discuss. The first is, what does wilderness mean to you as individuals? Why do you care? What does the word mean? Second of all, as business leaders in Montana, doing different things and looking at different economic activity, why does wilderness matter? What is that linkage between our ecology, our wild ecology, and our economics? And then finally, I'm going to be asking a question that I often think about, that I'm asked to think, is where are we going to be with wilderness in the United States, in the planet, in the next 50 years? Couple reasons I'm asking you guys these questions. First of all, back when I got a degree in philosophy and found that I was immediately unemployable from Seattle U, the Jesuits didn't tell me that part, by the way, I ended up hanging out in the best wilderness areas in the country, and that's what changed my life. So I have a very personal attachment to the Word, and I care very deeply about protecting and preserving the wilderness. I just want to get that out. That's not arguable with me. Wilderness matters, and I've given most of my life to protecting it in some way. So I want to hear what you guys think about the Word, and what does it mean to you. Then, why as business leaders, what does wilderness matter? You all have different angles on that. You all care about that, and I want to hear about that, other than hearing me talk. And then finally, the reason I asked about the next 50 years is that a lot of my doctoral work was on the Lewis and Clark Trail. I was very fortunate to put a degree together here at the university to look at the trail. And after we got done studying the Lewis and Clark Trail and the history of the trail and the changes on the trail and why it had changed, I was approached by the National Park Service, and I was asked to become part of an informal panel to care about the trail over the next 200 years. So there's a bunch of us to get together about once a year in Omaha, Nebraska, which is the headquarters of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, and we are literally trying to imagine and think about where the trail is going to be, what the trail will be like, and what does that even mean 200 years in the future. And if anybody like me is wondering about the pace of technology today, and I do a lot in technology, it's a really interesting juxtaposition to think about the pace of change and how we will preserve and protect and experience wilderness in just 50 years, let alone 200. So I want to future trip a little bit, and I want to think about that, and I know all you guys have good ideas on that. So that's a little bit of the idea of the format. I'm going to be asked to keep this relatively under control in terms of time, only time. There's no reason, I'm not up here to filter. I'm not up here to basically be a thought police. You guys are free to share, and I want you to share meaningful comments if you can. That's the point of this event. I think wilderness deserves honest and open discussion as much as possible. And then, as we get to 15 minutes, I will try to conclude a few comments back and forth. I'll try to say something meaningful. That may be questionable if I'll be able to do that or not. And then we will have at least 15 minutes for Q&A. And I really hope you have questions prepared in advance. I would really like you to ask questions and not pontificate. If you want to get up and start talking about your agenda or your ideas, that's cool. Talk to me afterwards. Talk to the panelists. I really want to facilitate dialogue. So try to keep your questions focused. Have a question, focus it, and ask it so the panelists can answer it. Okay? All right, thank you very much. With that all being said, I'm going to go down the line here and introduce our panelists. First and foremost, to my right is a dear friend and someone I've known for a lot of years, and someone I'm in business, for full disclosure, with Dory's husband, Mike Belts. He's one of my business partners and someone who's worked with me at GCS for 10 years. And so, Dory, welcome. Dory is a co-owner of an organization, a business here in town called Mamalode Magazine. And if you're not aware of Mamalode, you should be doing fantastic work, unprecedented work, and I also know Dory's business partner, and I'm really honored you're here. So Dory, welcome.
Thank you, Alex.
Next to Dory is Todd Frank, the owner of the Trailhead. How many people know the Trailhead in Missoula? Okay, so an organization, a business doing great work, has done great work for 40 years in Missoula. Todd and I just met. I should have met you earlier given how much stuff I buy in your store. But that's, you know, it's always a good time. So Todd, welcome, thank you. And then finally, Chris Mell. Chris Mell is with Headwaters Economics, doing incredible work in economic analysis of the value of public lands, all sorts of analysis, really brings an analytical flavor to our discussion, can provide a lot of perspectives, and has been instrumental, his organization, instrumental in Business for Montana Outdoors. I think 3 years ago or something, Marnie, you'd have to remind me, I was on a panel with the governor, and we were talking about the importance of public lands. I think I went a little crazy at that panel, and next thing you know, I was asked to be involved. But it's an honor to have you here, and thank you for coming up from Bozeman. So those are our panelists. Now I'm going to go back, and Dory, maybe you could say a little bit about yourself and your business.
Sure. Well, as Alex said, I'm a co-founder and the COO of a Missoula-based multi-platform media company called Mamalode. We started here in Missoula back in 2009, originally with an event called Mother's Day Eve that we organized for moms to celebrate Mother's Day with each other, without their partners, husbands, and kids. And that grew into a regional print magazine, which became a platform unlike most other parenting media, where moms and dads could share sort of their authentic stories about life as parents. We've grown substantially in the last year and a half, of really focused on our national audience and our national exposure. And we have a website that caters to readers and writers from all over the world. And we are very engaged sort of with the larger, both high-tech and media world out there. And as Alex said, I'm a wife to another business owner here in Missoula, and I'm a mom to 2 great kids, a 10-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl. So thanks for having me.
Dory, thank you. Todd?
My name's Todd Frank. I was born in Billings and came to University of Montana to go to school in 1981. Got a degree in geology and spent summers doing field geology and winters working in ski shops for a long time. And that love of the outdoors and sort of being outside drove me to want to do that year-round. Plus, my wife wanted me to be home more than a few months out of the year. So one job led to another, and eventually I ended at the Trailhead and purchased the business from the guy who started it in 1974 in May of 2000. So we've been there about 14 years now. We have a second location at the mall that caters to women because we find women to be very important to our business. I see a ton of familiar faces here, so obviously you guys are a huge part of why we're successful. You know, we've been at it a long time. This is our 40th year, and our business has changed dramatically over that time. Our clientele has changed. It's a rapidly changing world. I think that you commented on that, and I think that's going to be a really key component to our success in the future, as well as the success of continued wilderness. So wilderness anchors our business. It always has. It's a key component to why we're here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Chris Mell.
Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Mell, and as Alex said, I work at Headwaters Economics. It's an 8-person Montana-based research group. We're mostly in Bozeman and Helena, and our mission is basically to work with communities on land development, community development. So basically, how do you value the land? How do you keep the community the way it is or grow in certain ways that you want to grow? And we work with them across the West, from Montana down to New Mexico and then over to the coast. So I'll be talking about some of the research that we've done this afternoon, as well as some personal stories, and then I'll probably wrap in a bit. I'm a Bozeman City Commissioner, so in some ways, what does wilderness mean or protected public lands mean for Bozeman or for Missoula in terms of our community, and how we utilize that or take advantage of that designation to our benefit.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Again, appreciate you guys taking the time to be here, and again, for the audience. So first and foremost, the first question I wanted to ask, as I mentioned a second ago, is I really want to ask each of you, what does the word wilderness mean to you? It's a big word, capital W, little w. Quick comment on that. At Seattle U, I had the luxury of studying under my first great mentor, a guy named Michael McCloskey. And McCloskey was a guy that really believed in this concept of bioregionalism. He was the first guy that dragged me into the first wilderness area when I was a freshman in college. And my dad, growing up, my folks weren't much campers. My dad worked in medicine all the time, and he's either teaching. And this guy, McCloskey, had a profound impact on my life. And we began to study it, and we started reading, the works of Bob Marshall, and we read the works of Aldo, and we read the works of Emerson, and we looked at this. We looked at everything we could in Thoreau, and it became philosophically very important to me about wildness and what does it mean. He then challenged me and encouraged me to get a job in the Park Service. He said, if you love this so much and care about it so much, why don't you do something about it? And so I started applying for jobs, and I got rejected 29 times before I got my first position, and I lucked out, and it was in the middle of Glacier Park, up in Many Glacier. So I showed up there when I was 19 during my first summer, and as I mentioned, I think it saved my life. It didn't just change my life, it actually saved my life. And I decided I was going to stay in Montana for the rest of my life, and I did. I live near a wilderness area up in the Rattlesnake. I can walk into it. It's very important to my wife and family, etc. You get the drift. So I want to go down the line here, starting with you, Dory, if I may, and have you talk to me and this group about wilderness. Make it personal to you and tell us what it means. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Well, Montana's wilderness is what brought me here initially back in 1993, a long time ago now, when I had spent a couple years in Vail, Colorado, being a ski bum and a whitewater raft guide after college. And I decided that I loved so much the opportunity to go deep into the mountains or deep into the river canyons that I wanted to find a way to continue to do that and develop a meaningful career. And I saw Missoula as a place where I still had tremendous access to the wild, and in fact, even more wild than some of the lands I was recreating in Colorado, but also an opportunity to go back to school and figure out a profession that will allow me to combine those two passions of, really wanting to have a meaningful career and be part of a meaningful community and still have access to those wild places that I loved so much. So that's initially what brought me to Missoula, and I think it's certainly kept me here. I can't think of a better place to raise a family, and as I said, I have 2 kids, and I love the notion that these 2 kids are going to grow up being hardy little individuals who have, floated down the Missouri River in a hailstorm and hiked some of the highest peaks in Montana and gone into the Great Burn roadless area with just a backpack on and come out in the pouring rain, and that for all those reasons they're going to be great people because they're grounded in this beautiful place that we have here in the wildlands. And so, and for me, in addition to sort of valuing that as a parent, for me, it's a place I can escape when I need to be in touch with what's important, or I need to get inspired, or I need to or want to challenge myself physically, or feel grounded, or connect with my family without the distractions of what we all do to keep the wheels turning here in our everyday lives. We've taken trips down the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness through the Salmon River, where we can actually, there is no cell service. And you really get to unplug and sort of be present. So for all those reasons, for me personally, I really value the opportunity that we have in Montana to have such great access to those wild natural places.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to come back to some of the words you just shared and explore that a little bit. Todd.
I guess I would say that if I could use 2 words to describe what wilderness means to me, which is really not fair, but I'm going to try to do that. First, it's a magnet. It's what drew me sort of out of where I was at as a child. My parents did a lot of camping, pulled a trailer everywhere we went, and I always wanted to go just a little farther than we went in the camper. And as I got to be a young 10, 12-year-old, we started doing overnight backpacking trips. And growing up in Billings, the Beartooth Wilderness was sort of at our back door. And over time, that magnetic attraction sort of changed to become kind of an anchor. And to me, the wilderness is kind of what anchors my whole life in Missoula, and just my whole family. We're sort of drawn to being in that space, and it just keeps everything together for us, and knowing that it's there. We obviously, we live in a community like Missoula. We don't spend months a year like some of my friends get to in the wilderness, but we do a lot, and for us, it's the piece that anchors our whole family together. And so those 2 words, even though they're sort of different, it was that magnetic attraction to wild spaces, and then having that be part of my life is sort of always there, I think is really what drew me into the business I'm in. It was what attracted me to being in geology to start with. It was being on the landscape and trying to understand the landscape and have a sense of the time and the magnitude of that space. And then, that's really become, what has sort of held our whole family together. So,
Perfect. Thank you. Chris.
Well, my story has similar themes to the other panelists. Maybe one difference is that I'm an Easterner by birth, a Virginian who was living in Washington, D.C., and decided that he had to take a year off, and came through Montana on my way to Alaska. Drove to Alaska and back. It took 8 months, and was forever infected by that. And so there was an opportunity to take a job in Bozeman, Montana, and I basically called them up and said, not only do I want the job, I'll pay for myself to move there, and you can fire me at any time, as long as you let me move to Bozeman, because I'm coming. And in fact, I've already called the rental company to see if I can rent a truck in the next week. And fortunately, it worked out. But what I found is that we have these personal stories that matter to us, and matter to many of our friends, but as a researcher, more and more there's peer-reviewed literature that looks into the value of protected public lands and tries to, in a sense, understand it in a way that works for not just us as appreciators of it, but also in a business school setting or in a geology setting, to bring more science into it. And so I brought some of my research and put it on to my right, your left, on the front table there. It's for you guys to take. Please help yourselves. I'll try not to throw a lot of numbers out, but the numbers are on there. But we find in our research, for example, that not surprisingly, that non-metro counties that have more protected lands are generating jobs in the West much faster than counties that have less protected land. And in those same counties, for every 10,000 acres of protected land like wilderness or a national park or wilderness study area, the per capita income is $430 some higher. So a family of four is basically earning $1,600, $1,700 more a year by living in counties that have protected lands compared to other counties. So we've started to understand the direct economic benefits as well as the spiritual, the magnets, the draw that it plays, to combine those to have a better discussion when we're making policy about what do these protected lands mean, both what we have now, but also the decisions we want to make going forward. So in a sense, it's melding the personal and the policy into one.
Perfect. So there's so much that you guys just shared, and I'm hoping that the folks in the audience, this might be resonating with you, helping form some questions. But Dory, you said some words about providing you with an opportunity to move away from the distraction of life. I feel, I really resonate with you. I feel like my life has become increasingly full of distraction. I wonder how much more I struggle to become attentive and to be in the world and to share and celebrate place. So I think that's huge, and if you look at the phenomena of where we've been with connected devices, always on, our mobile world, our internets, our things, I think we're really going to be struggling. Now, interestingly enough, there are sociological and psychological studies being done right now that are really questioning the health status of folks that are always wired and always connected and becoming increasingly disconnected from this world. There's apps out there now that you can have on your phone that you can look at your phone and it allows you to see where you're walking down the street. So understand that the disconnectedness and perhaps that continuous distraction that Dory was mentioning, I think is a real challenge to the future of why wilderness. If you don't know the difference, why would you ever care? And if you don't care, why are you ever going to vote? And if you don't vote, it's very easy for these places to go away. And if you don't think it is, talk to me afterwards. In other words, you talked about connected, being connected. I think this is true in all what you guys said. What does it mean to be connected? Well, you'd like to be connected to wild places. And it means a lot to you as a person, to your family. And then ultimately, you talked about being present, being grounded. Those are quantitative, very philosophical, very heartfelt, spiritual statements. And I think it speaks to that huge dimension of wild places that we're talking about. One thing I think Aldo Leopold talked about, or it might have been Bob Marshall, I can't remember which. I was trying to get all of my literature out last night and all my books that I haven't looked at in a while. But one thing I loved about being in incredibly wild places is when I look into that abyss, I see myself. So ultimately, there's a profound phenomenology going on in wilderness that I think allows us to discover ourselves and be at home. So maybe there's something primeval, something primordial in those words. A magnet and an anchor. A magnet and an anchor. I can relate to being drawn, and I can be absolutely related to never wanting to leave. I feel like when everything else is going to hell in a handbasket, I can basically walk out of my house, put down the phone, put down the insanity of the world I've decided to create, and I can walk up into the rattlesnake wilderness as far as my body will carry me. I'm not quite in the shape I was when I was running around the Bob. And I feel like everything else falls away, and I know that I'm at home and I'm going to be okay. And maybe that's a little bit about that word anchor. And then finally, as we kind of went down here, I saw, we have what it does to our families, what it does to individuals. It drew you, and now also you're dedicating your life right now to describing and quantifying to some degree the value of wilderness. So first round, first question, thank you. Any quick additional comments on anything I've shared based on those words that I heard you guys share?
I would just throw out that I think there's another component to being out in the wilderness is sort of a feeling of vulnerability. And I think in our everyday lives, we are so controlling in so many ways, whether it's as a parent or as a professional about, getting things done and keeping things going. And I think, when you let yourself go out and realize how big the natural world is and how small you are in it, there's a vulnerability that I think is so important for people to experience. And I think that's something that we feel, and especially as a parent taking kids out there, there's even an added layer to that, that I've got, these little beings that I need to protect while I'm out there too. It's not even just me. And protect from what? You just sort of have these great conversations with yourself about where you are and how big it is and how small you are, really, in the scheme of things. And I think that's important too.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to switch gears. Topic 2, question 2. As business leaders, why does wilderness matter? Now, we've heard foreshadowing. How does it matter to your business? What does that mean? Again, this topic, this panel, this roundtable was on the economic importance of wilderness. And these folks were kind enough to be assembled today to talk about how is it impacting your bottom line? What part of the economic equation? Now, the one word I want to point out, everybody familiar with the word oikos? Who studied their Greek recently? Okay, look it up. O-I-K-O-S. The Greek word, about 2,700 years old, for home. It is the same Greek derivation for the word ecology as the word economy. So, there is, in our language, even though we use the word, we don't oftentimes know what the words mean. There is a foundation to that. And the Greeks believed, the ancient Greeks at least, believed that you could have a balance between the economic productivity of your city-state, which they called the polis, which is the basis of the word politics. You could have balance between your life and your city, between nature, which they cared very much about, and the economic activity of their city-state. So that's a word that I wanted to sort of inspire this second question as I go on down. Again, as business leaders, you all have distinguished yourselves in different areas of that, some new, some longer. What is wilderness? Why does it matter to you? Dory.
Well, I think I'll have a little bit of a different angle on sort of the economic piece than Todd or Chris will, but that's probably a good thing. But, starting what is now a national media company in a place like Montana that has, I think, a global recognition as a place of wild places, has actually opened doors for us as a business that might not otherwise open, in part because being from a place like that is a conversation starter in and of itself. There's stories to be told about how and why and what you do, and that's been fascinating to us. No matter where we travel in the United States, Montana is a big piece of the conversation, and the wild places here are a big piece. And no matter who we're talking to, there is a connection to Montana's wild places with people all over. They've been here for a wedding. They've had a life-changing experience. I just came back from Vegas. I got in it last night at 11, a very different kind of wild place, if you will. And I met a guy from Massachusetts. He was selling winter gloves at this trade show. And he said to me, "You're from Montana? I had the most significant experience of my life in Montana. And someday I have to sit you down and tell you this story, but it involves grizzly bears. And it changed my life." And those things happen all the time, actually, not just once in a while. And so, economically, there's a driver there and a connection that for us, as a small company starting in Missoula and becoming more national, has actually continued to open doors for us. And I think culturally as a business, too, it's a desirable place to live and work, in a place where you can escape to the outdoors, you work really, really hard, and then play really hard. So those are a couple of economic angles that I wanted to kind of talk
That's
about.
fantastic. We're going to come back and talk about how it helps your brand in a minute, but that's wonderful. Todd.
So at the end of the day, what I do is really simple. I mean, I'm a merchant. I buy products for this price and I sell them for this price, and I pay all my employees and all the other things that happen in our business in between, and if there's any left at the end, I get that. The entire industry that I'm associated with, what we call the outdoor industry, is basically a product or a child of the wilderness system in the United States. I mean, our business and our whole way of doing business didn't exist in 1964. It took 10 years, really, for all that to catch on until, in the mid-1960s, people bought their backpacks at sort of sporting goods stores right next to the guns and right next to the other things that they sold. And our our business basically evolved out of a bunch of people in the United States. I say a bunch, I mean the Yvon Chouinards of the world and these people who there's literally less than 1,000 of them that started businesses around the United States all about the same time. And it was as a result of the experiences that people had by being out in wild places and coming back and going, this is really cool. We need to figure out a way to get more people to do this, or we need to sort of answer the demand that's been created for it. So, you know, what I do is really simple. In some respects, I mean, we make it very complicated in this today's world of connectedness, but you know, we're answering people's needs to be in wild places as our entire business model. And I think that, you know, that I look around this room and I probably do business with, well, I mean, I saw the number of hands that were raised. I see an awful lot of familiar faces there. So without wilderness, my business wouldn't exist. I don't think our industry as we know it would exist. You know, the companies that are the pillars of our industry, people like Patagonia, wouldn't exist. It's just simply, it would be a different world without it. And I can't stress that enough. I mean, you know, it's maybe an oversimplification of it, but you know, without the work that people do here, there would be no outdoor industry.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't exist.
Thank you. Chris?
So I'm going to take being a city commissioner, in a sense, as my business and apply some of the things I've learned during my day job. And that is that we find that protected lands give our city or a Flagstaff or a Missoula or a Bend, Oregon or others a competitive advantage. Because when I look out of my office window and I see the Bridger Range, those trees are much more valuable to me as a city commissioner upright than they'll ever be vertical. That's not true for every community. Every community has its own challenges. But that wilderness is a magnet. And for us in Bozeman, certainly the wilderness supports a number of tourism and recreation and outfitter industries, but it's also more than that. That's in a sense the foundation of the economy. But we've been able to attract. In Montana, in the country, in North America, and even to some extent globally, the economy is changing. There's been a dramatic increase in services industries, professionals, healthcare workers, accountants, and because of productivity, there are fewer and fewer people who work, in a sense, the commodities, mining, timber, agriculture, manufacturing, and others, because you can produce more bushels of grain with one person or more cars per one person than you could before. And so with this shift comes an enormous amount of footloose activity. My wife telecommutes to the Bay Area from Bozeman, Montana. She walks to work. She has a quality of life that Dory mentioned that we so value, and the outdoors and the wilderness, the clean water, the clean air are an important part of that. They're not the only part, the schools, the crime rate, but they give us such an advantage compared to other places that when Oracle bought Right Now, we were terrified that they would leave, taking more than 100 very well-paying jobs out of our community and taking them back to the Bay Area. But not only did they stay, they've since invested in Bozeman, and we're growing. In fact, we're growing so much it keeps me up at night that we're growing too much for the problem. And part of the reason they came was because of that wilderness. So that gives us that competitive advantage that we can take advantage of through quality of life. I mean, some things we have to remember here in Montana is that today in Montana, people who work in the healthcare industry are almost double the number of people who work in mining, agriculture, and timber combined. So one sector, healthcare, is more than those other three sectors altogether, and healthcare is growing by leaps and bounds, while the others are not. Those three industries are very important to Montana, but they are holding their line in terms of the employment. Our growth areas are areas that Montana excels in, the wilderness, the ability to attract, the quality of life that we have. So as a business leader, I enjoy it myself, but I also see what an advantage it gives us compared to other communities to bring people in, to convince that entrepreneur to come to Bozeman, to come to Missoula, live here, work here, enjoy what we have, and still succeed professionally and meet those professional goals that you have.
Yeah, thank you. Just real quick, and I'm going to have to keep going here to stay on schedule, but for those in the audience, Dory, I think, brought up a huge point about the romanticism, the mysticism, and the overall brand attraction of Montana and how she's weaving it into the Mama Lode story. I think that's happening for a lot of companies in Montana, and it's worth commenting on, and maybe we can get some dialogue going on that in the Q&A. I think just explicit, flat out, my business is benefiting and would not exist if it wasn't for wilderness, says a lot. About a year ago, I had a chance to meet a guy named Conrad Anker, at a panel talking about economic development and public lands down at Senator Baucus's thing. And, you know, Conrad was talking about climbing the last ascent of Everest, and I was talking about climbing the stairs out of my basement and getting winded. And that was a joke. And you know, it was clear that he's built an entire career in the North Face, is really dedicated as a business to these lands. I saw that when I used to live in Shoto, and I worked on the Lewis and Clark. A long time ago, little shops were opening up on the Rocky Mountain front, helping people figure out how they were going to go do this and sell that and that backpack and that canoe and that kayak. And there was some tension back then, you know, and still will be, between that agricultural way of life. But those that really got it had a seamless experience between our agricultural activity and ranching and cattle grazing and also caring for the land. And, you know, it wasn't confrontational. It just took a couple cups of coffee around a kitchen table, and it's amazed what you can do to look at that. And then finally, Chris, I think as a city council person, your comments about the value of that landscape to Bozeman. I mean, Oracle spent $1 billion, $1.8 billion. I think Oracle's putting another $400 million into Bozeman. I think you guys are the hottest high-tech town in the Northern Rockies, Cordillera. I think there's somewhere between 5 to 10 companies that are relocating into the Oracle ecosystem in Bozeman. Oracle will run their entire North American Cloud Network Operations Center out of Bozeman, Montana. And one of the ways Oracle is able to recruit and retain and bring those people is because of the quality of life that it affords, because those people can work anywhere in the world. I guarantee you that. And they're choosing Bozeman so that when they step out their door and their wife and children or vice versa step out, they're stepping out into something that fuels not only their quality of life, but I'm going to argue creativity. Because there's something about our wild places, wilderness in particular, that allows us to ultimately see inside and become very creative. So there's a lot going on here on that question. You guys I appreciate your answers, and my feeble attempt to summarize that into some type of fabric. Finally, third question. And this is hard, and I think he had a few days to prepare for this question, so I appreciate that. How is our wilderness lands, the act itself, our congressional approach, how is this all going to change in the next 50 years? What's our experience like? We're 7 billion people on the planet now. We've got some significant global things going on if you read the news. We have people running around Montana that want to do away with the federal public domain. They would very much like the state of Montana to take over the Bob Marshall. They'd like the Nyack Wilderness to become something that somebody from TUDOT manages now. I'd like to know where you guys think wilderness is going and how is it going to change economically, ecologically, our experience, everything. And just give us that. And try to put yourselves out as much as possible in terms of threats and opportunities. What does it mean to our civilization moving forward? And I'm going to reverse the order, if I may. And sorry, Chris. And I'll start with Chris, and we'll work our way back to Dory. And maybe, Dory, if you'd do me the favor, because I know you can do this very well, listen to those gentlemen and maybe weave that into your response, if you would, or not. Okay. Chris.
But again, trying to look at it economically or business perspective, because I know other panels are talking about some of the ecology, and tomorrow I think there are explicitly some political panels about the future of policy. I'd have to say you can't be anything but bullish on the future of wilderness. We are having a bit of a tempest now, but as you heard from the other speakers, that wilderness gives us a cachet in an economic sense, sets us apart in a way that will become more and more valuable as we become more and more crowded. It was not, I have to admit, it was with some frustration that we passed the 1 million person mark in Montana. It wasn't all good news. But I can assure you, from all of us having friends in New Hampshire to Colorado or anywhere else, when they go to a trailhead and said, wow, there are only 10 cars here, what a great day. Whereas if I went to a trailhead in Bozeman and there were 10 cars there, I'd probably turn around and go look for somewhere else. So we still have an incredible advantage from the wilderness. I think the test for us is to realize when it's appropriate, how do we add to it, but also where could a community, in a sense, benefit from a combination of lands. in the landscape and how they are managed. But that tool is there for us to take advantage of. How we promote it, how we combine it with education, how we combine it with access to markets so that people can go out, see their clients, or whatever, will really be a test for us. But to take that tool away would be to take away part of our competitive advantage. And I think that just grows as we grow in people, but also because it is untrammeled by man, to be literal in the Wilderness Act itself. It's unique. There aren't many places in the East that are wilderness, period, or let alone have the size and scope of the backcountry of Glacier or the Bob Marshall or the backcountry of the forests around Yellowstone. And so that will always be there for us to rely on, both individually but economically. So while there'll be tests and tempests, I'm not too worried, because I think in the end run that bottom line will win out in terms of what it means for us as a state and as a nation.
Chris, thank you. Todd?
I sort of fall on the other side of that one. I think I'm fearful of sort of money and politics in general in my life. And I think it's going to be really challenging for us over the next 60 years to grow wilderness significantly. We may hang on to what we have, but I think there's going to be a constant pressure against more and even protecting what we have. I think people are going to try to chip away at the edges where they can, because there's in some cases economic interest for minerals or oil as an example. And I think that, combined with climate change and watching how our wilderness areas are going to change just because the climate's changing, I'm not terribly optimistic that we're going to be able to not lose a little ground in the next 60 years. I still think we have a lot going for us, but I'm maybe a little more pessimistic about it.
Well, we need to hear this. Dory?
I think Alex had some great foresight in switching the direction, because I think I can come in maybe in between you guys on this. I think Chris's comment about getting bullish, I think, is true. I think we do need to be bullish, but I also think we need to be more creative than we've been. And in my work, I spend a bunch of time out of Montana, and certainly working with business colleagues all over the country. And I'm an optimist by nature, and I see a tremendous opportunity that we haven't taken advantage of yet. And I think what that is our economy has changed tremendously in the last 10 years in many ways. But I think one of the most exciting ways is that we have rapidly growing high-tech businesses, particularly in California, but all over the country, that are made up of young, well-educated, generally progressive, active people who I think are yet untapped on these kinds of issues, and who I think place tremendous value on these places that we call wilderness, because they now spend their income, their extra income, to come here and vacation and go to these wild places. And I think we still employ, I worked as an environmental advocate for almost 2 decades in my career before I went into media. And I think that we're still using a lot of the same old strategies to kind of tackle these issues. And I think there's a whole new untapped market of people and strategies to engage them that we're not using. I mean, these are people that work at Google and Twitter and Facebook, and they're starting all kinds of companies, and they're young and excited, and they want to get involved. And I think that that's a place where we ought to start spending some time and energy in thinking about how we expand the community of advocates for these places. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That was nice. I appreciate it. Couple comments. I kind of I'm concerned too. I'm a little scared. I think I'm the glass is half empty kind of guy, and I don't know why. And I love optimism, and bless you guys, we need you. I'm concerned, and I don't disagree with anything you said, for what it's worth. I'm concerned for a few reasons. Anytime I hear that NASA is more committed to putting people on Mars than they are, protecting our wild places, I start to get a little weird about that. Start to look at the history of humankind and colonization and offward colonization. I'm talking 2064. Think about where we're starting to put our mind share and our thoughts. In other words, planet Earth is over, we're not going to make it, and we better figure out how the species is going to survive on a colony on Mars, the most inhospitable place on the world. I'm not excited about walking around the canyons of Mars. It ain't going to happen for me. and I'm pretty committed to what's going on planet Earth. So let's wake up a little bit. Number two, kids. When I was in Seattle, grew up in the Seattle area, what scared me is kids who had no socioeconomic way of ever experiencing anything in nature other than a park full of crack vials. I know that sounds a little cheesy and a little trite, but it's true. The numbers game in terms of people's experience and caring, I don't want to make wilderness the place of elites. I do not want it to be the place that people can afford to go because they can afford to go and everybody else can never get out of the city or these ridiculous places. When I lived in Mexico, 1981, 82, I saw people living and dying in garbage dumps in Mexico City. They were born in a garbage dump and they died. The life expectancy was 23 years of age. They had no idea about the Bob Marshall Wilderness. They were trying to survive off the garbage of other people. 2064, we have 7 billion people now, projected about 13 to 14 billion people. It's a lot of people wanting a lot of resources. And then finally, activists being active. Dory, I couldn't agree with you more. Let's get a lot more creative in our media, in our communication. Let's not have the same old debate that's a false debate, a false dichotomy. Let's have discussions about what we can do to preserve not only what we have and why. Ecological service is worth, I don't know, $50 billion alone in water quality coming out of the rattlesnake. Let's get more creative about our future. I wanted to start having that discussion. That's why I asked you guys the question. All right, with all that being said, we're going to conclude the Q&A, or excuse me, the question period here, the panel, turn to Q&A with the folks in the audience here. I don't know if there's mics being passed around. I don't know, okay, there's a mic that's there. So, folks, if you don't have any questions based on the last 40 minutes, then I will be concerned. So please come up, line up here if you have any questions of the panelists, and let's have a discussion. Thank you. Please introduce yourself and ask a question.
My name's Pat Sweeney, and I really appreciate you business, community, and political leaders up here and your perspective. My fear is your perspective isn't shared with the greater business community and with our political leaders. And I wonder, how can we make that change? And I know especially you, Chris, I've been reading what you've been doing for a number of years, and you're doing analysis that really shows that how quality of life can improve business models for people, and we have a better life. And I'm wondering, is it partly because a lot of those people in other places don't have the quality of life, they'll never have it, and they resent what we have? Or what do we need to do to convince people, have the press come out and say, really, this is what we want to do? Because people in this room, I think everybody here is here for quality of life. And I do think it's good for business, and you apparently do as well. So how can we change that?
Okay, so if I heard you correctly, what can we do to get other business leaders to share essentially in our support for wild lands and public lands?
And ultimately political leaders.
And ultimately political leaders. Okay, who wants to take the first whack at that? Chris?
I think that things like this are a start, and thank you, Pat, for your question and comments. But for example, it was mentioned in a meeting with Max. You know, someone from my organization was there. We've met with Representative Daines and anyone that will meet with us. And I think that the most important thing is sometimes I see that activists for any cause, whether it's a cancer group or outdoors or others, meet with themselves too often. And that they need to meet with others, just to say it politely. And that includes, I include myself in that. As a Bozeman City Commissioner, I meet with Helena and Missoula and much more often than I meet with Cutbank or Havre, and I should probably follow my own advice. But there's an opportunity there to ally, to say, look, we have some ideas of what wilderness means to us individually, but we also know what it means to the community, whether it's quality of life or meeting a bottom line and hiring people and our ability to compete. Let's work together, Chamber. You know, the Bozeman Chamber is very supportive of wilderness, but that doesn't mean the statewide chamber is. And so how do you, in a sense, say, look, there are reasons here for common cause, and be willing to find those commonalities and set some other things apart. I think that is probably the only way to get something done right now, is to take the time, and it will be a lot of time to build up trust, to find those commonalities so when you do meet, you can find some things to agree on or to agree to disagree so that you can move on to more important things. But that isn't happening nearly enough now, and I think we'd find some welcome welcome if you knocked on their door, is what I'm trying to say, because they also feel that they're not being heard on their particular issue, and they would look for allies just as we are as well if we're concerned about public lands. Okay, sorry to ramble.
Oh, that's okay.
Todd?
I would just say quickly that, our industry that I work within, that group of 1,000 people, it's really what it gets down to. We are having an impact as an organization in talking to political leaders. We changed direction of things in Utah by simply bringing the governor of Utah to our trade show and walking them around and letting them experience what the 30,000 people that attend the trade show for 7 days in Salt Lake City have economic impact on their community, and getting them to listen to what our concerns are. So I think our voice as an industry is very strong. I mean, we're made up of the North Faces and Patagonias and these very, very large corporations that have a tremendous amount of political power, and they're starting to flex their muscles. I mean, if you just Google Yvon Chouinard and listen to some of the tirades that he's gone on, he's awesome. I mean, he's not unwilling to state what he thinks, and so I think we're doing it as an industry as much as we can. I think I could do better locally, and be more involved politically. But
Thank you. Dory?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think that Business for Montana Outdoors is a great start of an organization pulling businesses together around the value of our public lands. But I think that dialogue could be expanded nationally because we're talking about federal lands that really belong to citizens of the United States. And I think there's a lot more we can do, not just to engage the outdoor businesses, which are an obvious and a natural, but other people in business who have tremendous political and social influence today. I think we're not yet engaging those people, and I think there's a lot they would have to say and a lot they could offer to the conversation.
Thank you. Next question, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the panel. My name's Phil Huff. I'm with the Friends of Scotchman Peaks Wilderness. We're advocating for wilderness in North Idaho. I live there. Like most people in this room, I choose to live in this region because of the bounty of nature it provides. And it's real easy for us to see that wilderness, designated wilderness, draws people and draws economies. Even our communities in Sandpoint and around that don't have designated wilderness have gotten it. They get the message that it's good for business. So my question, and it's probably directly related to Chris, is when we look at the studies done, we see that there's a correlation between protected public parks, protected wilderness, and the economies. Is that due more to the, as we heard earlier, organic nature of the wilderness, the fact that it's the beauty of those there, or the legislative protection that's been provided? Is there anything we can look at empirically that shows a difference in quality of life, a difference in the economic vibrancy before and after designation?
Okay, hardcore question. Chris?
Yeah, let's our inner peer review question there. There are a number of peer-reviewed papers that try to measure quality of life, and not surprising, there are probably about 30 papers and 31 opinions about what it is. But what we found is that in general, across the West, communities next to protected public lands do better for job creation and also for income. But again, every community is very specific. What is happening in Libby, Montana is much different than Bozeman. And as I talked about some of the trees being upright around Bozeman, it may be that Libby wants more of a mix, that they want to have some protected lands that are an attractant to areas, but they also would see that there's a utility in having some timber jobs, and done at the right pace in place would be the appropriate language for both. Where is it appropriate to have wilderness? Where is it appropriate probably to have some use of the land? And that answer in Libby will then be different in southwest New Mexico, as it will be different in Oregon, and so on. And so while there are some generic rules about this, it would be a mistake to say every community is a cookie cutter waiting to be scratched out of the dough and that we can apply it the same. And so go to your community leaders was what I would say, and talk to them. What are you doing for education?
Yeah.
How are you getting our products to market? How are you capturing creative people who want the wilderness, but also have to be in business and want their kids to go to good schools and have to go visit their clients and so on. So it's a complicated story to know exactly what quality of life is, and also how do you capture that. Wilderness is clearly part of it, but it's not all of it.
Okay, quickly, the rest of the panel, comments on that question?
I don't know if I really can add a whole lot to that, but I think local community leaders are the place to start, educational piece.
Excellent. Dory?
I'm good.
Okay. We're going to wrap up, folks. This has been a really fast hour or 50 minutes or whatever it was. First of all, I want to really thank you folks, the panelists, for today, for being here, for your thoughts and your time and your contributions to this dialogue about the economic importance of wilderness and all of its dimensions. Second of all, I really want to thank Business for Montana Outdoors for sponsoring this whole thing and being a sponsor tonight for a reception and really trying to make these linkages. I think people in this room, if you really want to know about 80 companies in Montana, from some of the largest to smallest, that have bound together to try to bring common ground on this, look at BMFO. That's why I'm proud to be a member of it. Finally, I would agree completely that I think it's time to ask our leaders, our city leaders, our county leaders, our elected officials, or those that are about to get elected, do you care about wilderness? And if so, what are you going to do about it? I hear about a lot less jobs, less government, more government, you know, all those nice little quips. But that doesn't do anything for me in terms of what are you going to do to protect the Bob Marshall in the next 50 years, or the Frank, or any other wilderness areas in the United States and around the world. Also, I think one of the great challenges is the wilderness of our oceans. I'm not much of an ocean guy. I don't get in there very often. I can't scuba dive. My ears explode at like 8 feet of water. We got a vast wilderness called the oceans. It's under threat, and take a look at that sometime as a wilderness concept. With all that being said, I also specifically want to thank the Mansfield Center for putting on this conference, and finally I want to thank everybody in this audience and those that had a chance to ask some really important questions. Thank you all very much for attending, and everybody have a good afternoon. Thank you.